Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are two basic questions implicit in this hearing. The first is, should non-citizens be allowed to vote? The Constitution is silent on this point, so it falls to state legislatures to answer this question for their own elections and for the Congress to answer that question for federal elections. The states in Congress have answered that question clearly and decisively, that American citizens, and only American citizens, have a right to vote to guide the American nation. To me, that's the most fundamental definition of citizenship. And I think that that's a view held by the overwhelming majority of Americans. It's obviously not held by many Democratic officials in the jurisdictions that they control. And the irony is that so many of them, just a few years ago, were complaining about foreign influence in American elections by making internet posts. Now they've got no problems with illegals actually voting in our elections. But that's beside the point. Assuming that most people agree that voting in American elections should be the exclusive right of American citizens, the next question is, how do we prevent the votes of foreign nationals canceling out the votes of American citizens? And to this question, the Democrats tell us, well, that's a non-issue because there's no evidence that foreign nationals are casting votes in American elections. But if you look at the actual studies, that's simply not true. The chairman mentioned the 2014 Old Dominion George Mason University study of non-citizens voting. They concluded 6.4% of non-citizens voted in 2008, and that 2.2% voted in 2010. But that's not the only study out there. In 2014, Stanford University came to a similar conclusion. They concluded, and I quote, the proportion of non-citizens who voted was less than 15%, but significantly greater than 0. Similarly, in 2010, we found that more than 3% of non-citizens reported voting. In addition, the analysis suggests that non-citizens' votes have changed significant election outcomes, including the assignment of North Carolina's 2008 electoral votes and the pivotal Minnesota Senate victory of Democrat Al Franken in 2008, unquote. And that is before the last 4 years when this administration has allowed an additional 7.5 million illegal migrants into the country, a population that is larger than the state of Arizona, our 14th most populous state, with 9 congressional districts and 11 electoral votes. At the moment, the RCP average tells us that only 1.1% of the vote separates Harris and Trump. So if 2% of those votes is illegal, I guess that's the definition of rare illegal voting, well, that means that 2% of Americans' votes are being canceled out by those illegal votes of foreign nationals, and that is more than enough to decide the presidential election. And even if this was not happening, the mere perception of it's enough to destroy public confidence that the vote will accurately reflect the will of the American people. Now, Secretary Byrd, isn't it true that many states have done surveys of their voter rolls and found thousands of foreign nationals on them, and that many of them have a history of voting?
That is correct, Congressman.
Can you give us any additional details on that?
So I can tell you in Florida, we've been at this process for more than a decade. As I mentioned, we sued the Department of Homeland Security in 2012, so we have some experience at this. Since 2022, Florida has removed over 1 million individuals off of voter rolls, some of which includes non-citizens. And in fact, we have 2 individuals who've recently been arrested and prosecuted for attempting to fraudulently influence elections in Florida. This isn't a fake or contrived issue.
Ms. Mitchell, what do you know on this subject?
Well, I included in my written testimony some examples of exactly how problematic it is and how many, I'll give you a couple of examples. The Public Interest Legal Foundation sued the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 2018 to obtain the records regarding non-citizens being added to the voter rolls in Pennsylvania. And the Department of Transportation admitted that there was a, quote, glitch in the system that added 100,000 aliens to the Pennsylvania voter rolls. That litigation is still ongoing because of efforts by the Department of State in Pennsylvania to not answer the questions.
But the Democrats have just told us, don't worry about that, that the penalties are so great that no one would dare to illegally vote. But it's already a federal crime to cross the border without permission to begin with. It's a felony to do so repeatedly. And as you pointed out, that by definition is not acted as a deterrent for any of these individuals. I know in California, you can't prosecute somebody for voting illegally unless you can prove they actually knew it was illegal. And all a defendant would need to say is, hey, they handed me a registration form, they sent me a ballot, how was I to know? And that's a valid point. And how many people are in legal jeopardy and don't even know it?
Well, I think that that's one of the things that people don't realize is that this is a really vulnerable population. And as Ms. Jinks pointed out in her comments, if somebody hands you a form and you don't really speak the language and somebody's shepherding you around and they're responsible for getting you benefits and you're just putting your name on things, how do they know? And that is happening. It is happening as we speak. And I think that one of the things that's problematic is that I also included in my testimony a reference to some announcements by Virginia's governor about removing more than 6,300 non-citizens who are on the Virginia voter rolls. Those were people who self-declared, who realized, oh my gosh, we are on the voter rolls and we're not supposed to be. And there are several other states that have done likewise. So this is not an insignificant problem.